because most people follow or focus on this omnipotent figure,
Right.
Whether it's Allah or Jesus or God in
Yeah.
Judaism. So why do you think there is such a focus on the omnipotent being rather than just their teachings?
Really good question. I'm trying to think of which perspective to answer it from. I'm going to offer you two. Okay. I think if we looked at the scientific study of religion, Religionswissenschaft in German, or what we do in religious studies departments, so Clifford Geer's, Talal Asad, they would say that through the period of human evolution, okay, we gradually learn to personify a lot of things, okay, to recognize each other as persons, but also to some extent to personify animals, creatures, right? Most people believe the dog is pretty much like them in some way.
Mm-hmm.
So we anthropomorphize, we chat with our dogs.
Right.
We don't think of them as gods, by the way.
Right.
But the flip side of that is when we see something happening that appears purposeful or willful, the laws of nature, the sun coming up, our tendency, I think we have evolved for this, our tendency is to attribute that appearance of orderliness and rationality to a person.
Right.
And so if there is an orderliness or rationality to nature, then we are going to attribute this to nature's God, some kind of personification of the deity.
Mm.
That would be one sort of explanation. Another one, I think, is that we simply and I don't mean to be demeaning by this because theologians are better than I have explored it thoroughly, but there's a tendency, if we're the biggest, most intelligent personality we know, then we project the attributes of ourself onto whatever is transcendent.
Right.
If it's intelligent, then it must be kind of super intelligent.
Right.
If it has feelings, it must be super feelings. Or Aristotle would have said, it is the perfection of all that we know. But that means it's the perfection of our own imperfection.
Right. So projecting our ego into it.
We project it into it, I think, to some extent.
Yeah.
And we're all, by the way, religious people, at least in the monotheistic religions, see this as idolatry and therefore try to problematize it and continually deconstruct it. But we're always in a battle back and forth with this.
Right.
Do we make it something easy for us to see and relate to?
Mm-hmm.
So it means it's sub-God, but a little more human.
Right.
Or do we make it so vacuous, nebulous, and ethereal and idealized that we can't get a grip on it?
Right. So you think that the personification is just an easier way for us to grasp it and understand it in that sense?
Yeah, I would tend to go along with a guy named James Fowler. He wrote a book on faith development, who in his rather complex structuring says the structure of our faith tends to change through time. And without any judgment about better or worse, when we reach a certain age or have certain mental capabilities for abstraction, we have the capability of moving onward toward a sort of a mystical or encompassing view.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that's better or not, he thinks he can track that to 6 stages of faith development. But I think this is the psychology of that is insightful.
Mm-hmm.
That how far our faith moves in the direction of a truly universal transcendent, which would be what the Stoics are trying to get at.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Depends on the continued development of certain capacity to imagine.
Right. Yeah. Which kind of comes in line with what we were saying earlier about secularism, because I think secularism has become more predominant as science has helped us see things. The sun's rising because we're rotating around it,
Right.
As opposed to personifying it because we don't understand it, right?
Right.
So do you think, I think there's a study that said most people aren't dogmatic about their faith.
Right.
And so they don't think that their religion is the only way to salvation.
Right.
And I think if you ask somebody this a couple hundred years ago, the answer would be vastly different.
Yeah.
Because of this rise in secularism
Sure.
and science, probably. But do you think that this is a sign of like weakening religiousness, or do you think it's just a society as we're becoming more spiritual?
That's a good, and let's make the distinction then between being spiritual and being religious,
Mm-hmm.
right? I would say if your culture offered you essentially a very limited number of ways of being spiritual, okay, so the what you could be and how you could understand God was really limited to what was within the religious framework of your culture.
Mm-hmm.
Also, bear in mind that until the modern era, most people didn't have time to think about stuff like this.
Right.
They were working 12 hard hours a day to get enough food on the table to survive and get through the winter. So yes, they went to mass. If we're in Europe, right? They go to mass or they go to the synagogue once a week. They chant their prayers and stuff, and then it's back to work. Philosophy's a game for the rich. We've gradually gained the freedom and time to begin to imagine and be creative and think outside those dogmatic boxes. And secularism rises in this same period of prosperity. With that, I think we have the freedom now to question the dogmas
Mm-hmm.
that limited us, and secularism creates the social space to do that. And that's been happening for 100 years.
Right.
But I think Charles Taylor points out it becomes a widely available option only in the latter part of the 20th century.
Right.
Okay. And I think about just an example of this. In my teenage years, I lived in Richardson, Texas, so it's north here. Well, we're in Irving, right?
Right.
Over to the east. It called itself a city of churches. The major industries were IBM, Texas Instruments, and some other tech industries and banking. Okay. No matter where you were socially, if you lived in Richardson, you were going to be in church on Sunday. And it was church. There was a relatively small Catholic community. There was a there was a large Jewish community that was outside of Richardson. It was up on Hillcrest Road.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that wasn't part of Richardson, strictly speaking. And I don't think Beth Torah over in Canyon Creek even existed yet. So you were going to be religious in a certain way. You were going to be Christian.
Right.
And it behooved you, if you thought you were going to get ahead in business, if you were going to advance at TI, if you were going to move up, behooved you to be in your three-piece suit in church on Sunday somewhere.
Mm.
Preferably First Baptist or First United Methodist. Right? Because those were the big dogs. But it could be the others too, Church of Christ, Presbyterian, Episcopal. That has certainly changed.
I think that's I think that's a good thing.
Well, I think it's a good thing too.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that social pressure necessarily created good religious people.
Absolutely. Completely agree.
Right?
Right.
But another way to look at that is, as society opened up, people, and I'm going to say particularly people my age and a little bit younger, realized that they had a choice. And that choice could be just, I'm not going to church, so I'm going to sleep late. The choice could also be, well, I'm going to read more deeply and think about stuff. I'm going to see if I can't chart my own course. Maybe it would be a choice to find a kind of a spirituality in the growing number of alternatives. So I think my generation, maybe the generation before, generations after, deeply influenced by the world that was created by J.R.R. Tolkien. Okay. C.S. Lewis, Star Wars.
Yeah.
Okay. So these were huge worlds, each of which had a distinctive spirituality, right? And very intentionally in the case of Tolkien and Lewis.
Mm-hmm.
Really with George Lucas too, certainly in the original Star Wars.
Yeah.
I think for a lot of people that gave an alternative way of exploring who am I, what's my relationship to God, good and evil, how do I make choices, right? That I can now explore without the dogma of Orthodox Judaism or Orthodox Christianity or something like that.
Well, and I guess I haven't read enough of the Bible to know this, but I would say that, would you think that the religious teachings in the Bible have a dogmatic teaching?
Ooh, such a terrifically good question. You don't mind if I say yes and no, okay? If one simply reads through the Christian Bible, so I'm going to include the Tanakh, the Jewish Bible, our Old Testament, the Jewish Bible, Jewish Scripture, Christian Scripture. If you start at page 1 and you read straight through it, okay, 99% of it's narrative. Maybe not 99, 95% is narrative. It's stories. And it is the stories that elucidate possible ways of being human in the world in relationship to God always, right? But it's stories, and they're pretty non-dogmatic. In fact, often they're complicated, like the Abraham and Isaac story.
They don't offer its interpretation. It's just this is the story. Now you must.
This is a story. You're going to have to figure it out.
Right.
They don't lend themselves to easy dogma.
Yeah.
And they're complicated. Is King David a hero or a villain? Well, he kills a guy to get his wife. And yet he's the greatest.
Right.
Or there's Solomon. Solomon's kind of the second greatest. He builds the temple, but he's also got 1,000 wives and 1,000 horses. The stories are complicated, and they invite complex reflection on what it means to be human in relationship to God. However, eventually, all of these stories, these narratives, depending on the religious tradition and how it plays out, will fall into the hands of professionals, of people for whom it is important that the community have fixed standards of belief and practice, and therefore they need to be turned into dogma.
Right. And I do want to talk the human ego and the duality of religion in that sense too.
Right. Yeah. Go ahead. But I think that's the short story.
Yeah.
I'm a professional. My degree, my PhD is actually history, so maybe I'm a biased person. But I work in a school that depends on the teaching of dogma. Our class of people that make up our school are dogmaticians. We draw our salary from it, and we train people to be dogmaticians. Okay? Clearly, we have a vested interest.
Right.
But it does occur to me often that we should step back and go, is that ideal?
Right.